All right, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emma Jalonen. I'm the General Manager of the Finnish-British Chamber of Commerce. And I'm joined today by Simon Portman and Michael Barret from Marks Clerk. Simon is a commercial lawyer and Michael is a trademark attorney. And we are going to be talking about protecting your brand during lockdown. To start off, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. How has your working life and that of your clients changed since the lockdown?
Thanks, Emma. I'll make a couple of comments there. So first thing to say is that we're lucky. So I'm very lucky that the firm I work for is very well geared to withstand the pandemic. We've got secure IT, we work seamlessly, that's good for clients. I'm no longer sitting in a central London office, but in a home study. The aircon is replaced by a window, the view's more rural than the cityscape, but the work I do hasn't really changed. I suppose how I work has been impacted, whereas before I'd wander by to speak to a colleague face-to-face or pop to a client's office for a quick meeting. We're now doing everything really by video conference, by audio conference. So I spend a good proportion of my day on client meetings by Zoom or Skype. We've even run a virtual team quiz. We've joined networking events by teams. And what's really important in this pandemic is to stay connected. Seeing people gives you the visual clues on what's working or not. And I find it fascinating also to see a snippet into people's lives. A virtual coffee or a drink isn't quite the same, but it is doable. I think the importance for connectivity is both for clients, but also for family and friends. So many of the people I speak to are kind of working their life. That's to say they're really showing how flexible they are in making sure they support their family and balance their work responsibilities. So we're obviously working hard for clients, but just as importantly, we're supporting those around us. There are quite a few times when I've been on conference calls that are kind of enlivened, should we say, by a client's child shouting in the background. But the pandemic's brought out the best of us, and I think we've kind of welcomed this more human side into our working lives. I don't think in terms of the clients, any one solution fits everyone. Some clients are booming in this time. Those with internet capability and secure delivery are thriving. Some are struggling and taking advantage of government support to help them. We offer support where we can give it, but I suppose in a nutshell, really, it's realizing that people have got other responsibilities that we might not be facing. For example, people who are impacted by the virus, people with homeschooling challenges, people facing mental and physical health challenges. So staying connected really does help. That's a kind of quick snapshot, I think, of how things have changed.
Simon, how about you?
Like Michael, I'm actually finding working remotely not too bad. One thing that has recently happened to me that exposed me to the inconvenience of it, the front four teeth I have due to an operation a few years ago, and not my own, and one of them broke a few days ago. And the dentist said to me, well, if it was a case of you coming in and having your tooth fixed, that would be okay, and you can come in because it's an emergency, but all the labs are shut, so you have to deal with it. So if I look like I've been in a fight, that's why. It's, the world of technology and intellectual property can be rough and tumble, but not that bad. I work for a lot of companies in the healthcare sector. So as you can imagine, some of them have been very busy lately with things like vaccine development, test kit distribution, and PPE. I also head up our VR team, and as you can imagine, they are really coming into their own at the moment with everyone working and collaborating remotely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot for all of us to adjust to, and it's definitely been a big change for us as well. I'm very thankful that our organization is really well equipped for this, and we've been able to sort of take it in stride, and we're able to work remotely, even cross country borders at the moment, as some of my team are in Finland. But I mean, yeah, it's been an interesting adjustment, and staying home this much is definitely not what I expected this year to be. But I think it's also been really, really inspiring to see so many companies. I mean, there's a lot of companies struggling. I do know that, and a lot of people struggling as well. But it's been really inspiring to also see the companies who are doing really, really well in this, and sort of innovating and coming up with new product offerings and things like that, and sort of really thriving through this. And now that we're obviously all staying at home, isolating, nobody's going to the shops, and people's consumption habits have changed quite a lot. That's a nice segue into our topic. So, are brands still important in this kind of time, and if so, why?
Yeah, Emma, you're right. I mean, I think the retail environment has, been suffering on the high street. As you said, people are at home, but they're turning to online shopping to meet their requirements. And I think that is a sort of forceful reason. It means that businesses that want to win a larger consumer share have got to work that bit harder on protecting and building their brands for the new marketplace. Many established online businesses, like, for example, those offering homeware products, have seen a boom in sales as consumers turn to refurnishing their homes, redecorating their homes during the lockdown. I think the lockdown has also seen development of apps and software that, for example, enable consumers to try on clothes in a virtual environment, and fashion brands that have invested in these technologies are really seeing the dividends now. So yes, I mean, there have been businesses, some at the request of government, that have profited by adapting their primary industrial focus towards COVID-19 directed initiatives. For example, Dyson making ventilators, Pret offering discounts on drinks and sandwiches for NHS workers, BAE Systems for the NHS. Alcohol companies like Brewdog make hand sanitizer now. Clothing manufacturers, Barber and Burberry, among others, make gowns and other PPE items for the NHS. So, brands are still important, and I think in this environment they are grabbing headlines in a variety of different ways, and businesses paying attention to those brands now is just as important as it ever has been. Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Of course, there are challenges where you get these companies moving into PPE or ventilators or sanitizer, because firstly, they might need to set up a completely new supply chain, and that means new contracts that they may need putting in place quickly. They may need to make sure that they're getting a license to new intellectual property. And also, they are going to need to probably become familiar with a new regulatory framework. If you make a sanitizer or a ventilator, and then you suddenly find it doesn't meet the standards, so you can't sell it, what could have been, a good gesture becomes a PR own goal, and you could have wasted a lot of money as well. As I mentioned earlier, the VR world is also one that's seeing opportunities. And I think that for anyone, and there probably are people who are going to be looking at this podcast from Finland, Helsinki is one of the most networked cities in the world, has really led the way in this regard. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, normally it has a big May Day concert. And this year they did it virtually. There's already a VR company called Zone, if I'm pronouncing that right, who've been working on a virtual city centre for Helsinki for people to visit. They were involved in hosting the concert. Finland has a population of around 6 million, and out of those, 700,000 people tuned in for the concert. I think that's about nearly 12% of the population, and 50,000 of them used avatars. And I think there's another virtual concert there coming up soon. Also, you know, people are increasingly meeting virtually like we are now. But a lot of people, you know, are a bit hesitant about Zoom because, you know, they might not want to be on camera, they might not want people to see what their house looks like. But if you have a VR meeting, you can use avatars in a virtual setting. You've got privacy, and it's that much more engaging. So when I was last in Helsinki, back in the days when we were legally allowed to travel, I visited a company called Glue, had a go at their virtual meetup. And this was in a meeting room, and I got virtually, and I got to go out on the outside, and suddenly I was looking out over the Alps. The other thing with virtual meetings is that you can do product design using them. So you can, you don't just have, you know, virtual PowerPoints or whiteboards, but you can have 3D models of products in front of you, and that might be a ventilator, it might be the molecular structure for something, and you can move them around and look at them. So I was able to look at a bit of furniture and take it apart while it floated in the air. So these are really engaging ways where people can now design products and work out the manufacturing processes, and also because they're not physically in the same room or laboratory, there's no danger of them infecting each other.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting that you got to do that. That sounds really cool. And I think that there's so many really amazing opportunities in the field of VR and AI, especially, and now is definitely the time to really hone in on those and try to make the most out of it and really get those technologies to break through. So there's definitely a lot of really interesting opportunities. Are there any other challenges and opportunities in the current situation that you didn't already mention?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you know, this is a very challenging time for business. Let's not mistake that. The global nature of the pandemic has led to severe market dislocation and recessions hitting the countries around the world. We aren't just seeing the effects of the virus on our community's physical health, but it's also having an impact on people's economic welfare as well. So the most worrying effect possibly is that none of us know quite how long it's going to last. I guess as a result, we've seen businesses not just furloughing staff, but also making redundancies, and the very uncertainty of that situation means that now more than ever businesses are needing to keep very close to their traditional customers and to rely upon the brand loyalty that they've worked to develop over very many years. There are, of course, opportunities in this climate. I mean, some businesses are suffering, but others are inevitably succeeding. And I guess that those most innovative and adaptable to this new reality are the ones that are likely to survive best. Keeping the brand strong and uppermost, I guess, in people's minds is a key tool in that survival pack. So new and emerging businesses need to look at ensuring that effectively they're free to use their brand and then registering it to keep others from using it.
Well then, how do you actually go about getting a trademark?
Well, the best way of securing protection in a brand is to file an application to register it as a trademark. So protection is obtained territory by territory, and the territories you choose to file in are often guided by where it is that you're planning to use the brand. So a trademark can protect a lot of different things. It could protect a name, words generally, colours, numerals, sounds, logos. Now you can even, in some territories anyway, protect a moving trademark by filing a multimedia file at the Trademarks Registry. And in fact, Marks Clerk were the first UK firm of trademark attorneys to file one of these on behalf of a major client in the electronics sector. Yes, I mean, in order to ensure that you are free to actually use the mark, we would ordinarily recommend searching to ensure that there aren't any third parties that already have rights in a brand that could be used to block the use and also the application to register it. And that's very important. After you've assessed the risks of bringing the mark into use, and assuming that you are comfortable with those risks, you place an application on file at the relevant registry. So this involves providing a specimen of the mark, listing the goods or services you want to cover. These fall within numbered classes or categories under the internationally accepted classification system called the NICE classification. There are 34 categories of goods and 11 categories of services. So, for example, clothing items fall into class 25. And then once all of that is in place, then you need to just include the name and address of the owner on the application. So it's quite straightforward. The registry then examines the application to check that the form has been correctly completed and that the terms for the goods and services selected meet the local registry's requirements. Those terms can differ from territory to territory. The registry also then decides if the mark can function as a trademark in that territory. So you aren't allowed typically to file an application, for example, that monopolizes terms that describe the goods or the services. So to take an example, cauliflower is a very bad trademark if you're proposing to sell fruit and vegetables because it describes the type of vegetable. But it's a very good term if you're proposing to sell home insurance because cauliflower doesn't as a term hold any relevant meaning in relation to insurance. In some territories, the examiner would also then compare the trademark applied for with earlier filed applications and registrations, looking on the register to try and see if the mark applied for is too similar to ones that are already registered or which are pending in the queue ahead of you. And the examiner will block an application if he or she considers a confusingly similar earlier right exists on the register. So if you get through all of that, then the application is published. And in many territories, that's the start of a period of time when third parties are able to challenge the application by filing an opposition to it. Assuming that the application isn't opposed or survives the opposition challenge, it then becomes registered and the owner enjoys the rights to use the registration to block later use of the mark by a third party or other third parties, often by threatening or actually initiating infringement proceedings against them. So the registration lasts for a 10-year period. In most countries, it's renewable at the end of that period and at the end of successive 10-year periods, provided you pay a renewal fee. And if the renewal fees continue to be paid, the mark should be effectively renewable forever ad infinitum. So that's a kind of quick snapshot of the process to register a mark and how you go about getting protection in a territory.
Thank you so much for going through that. Are there any problems that you can encounter throughout the process?
Yes, well, I mean, the main problems you find are when you are clearing the mark for use, if there are potentially blocking earlier rights, that hopefully is flushed out by the searching that we talked about. You can sometimes receive an examiner's objection, either perhaps, as I said, because the classification isn't quite right, or the mark is a weak mark, its capacity to function as a trademark within the registrability rules is a bit borderline. So for example, if it's very descriptive or not distinctive or deceptive even, or even contrary to public policy or morality. Interestingly, on this last point, there have been a number of coronavirus-themed trademark applications recently. The UK IPO, the Intellectual Property Office here, has seen applications to register marks like pandemic, COVID-19, and coronavirus, and they're all for a variety of different goods and services. 2 applications for COVID-19 filed in March this year were withdrawn following examination, and that might be an indication that the registry has said, no, this is a public policy reason and you really shouldn't be allowed to register this. Other problems, you might get an examiner objecting on the basis that they found an earlier third-party right on the register. This is called a citation, and typically you won't be allowed to proceed without overcoming that citation in certain territories. And then finally, you might, for example, receive a third-party objection when the mark is published during that opposition period. So there are a variety of different sort of problems that you can encounter in the process.
I mean, you mentioned the pandemic there and people trying to sort of trademark that. Will there be any impact from the current situation on the validity of a registration?
Yes, one of the principles of trademark law is that if you don't use a trademark registration in relation to the goods or services that it protects, you could lose it. after a period of time, starting with when the mark registers. In the UK, that's 5 years from registration. In the US, it's 3 years. It's different in different territories. Third parties then become entitled to apply from that point onwards to cancel the marks that haven't been used. So one permissible reason for not having brought the mark into use is that there are proper reasons for that non-use. Usually this is because of events outside the trademark owner's control. So for example, civil wars or import restrictions or awaiting approval from government agencies, for example, the MHRA or the FDA and so on. These can constitute proper reasons. It'll be interesting to see if the pandemic becomes a proper reason for not bringing the mark into use. Only time will tell. Academic writers are suggesting that in most jurisdictions the pandemic will not be considered a proper reason if the non-use has actually been going on for long before the outbreak of the pandemic. So I think we would still suggest that trademark owners check quite carefully with their advisors whether their registration is old enough to be vulnerable in this way, and then to look at creative ways of showing the use of the mark, perhaps in this environment by turning to the online market and making use of internet and trying to achieve sales through that if possible.
All right. Well then, will dealing with infringements of the brand be any more difficult than before?
Yes, I mean, I think that the good news for brand owners is that the UK courts continue to hear cases that are brought before them for brand infringement, and they've altered their practices so that trials, interlocutory hearings and so on can be conducted remotely with video conferencing technology. What will no doubt become a stampede, that will no doubt become a stampede into online retailing, and I think in the light of the consumer behaviour showing a preference towards established brands, the online market is going to see a rise in counterfeits, unlawful parallel imports and so on. So brand owners need to be quite vigilant and to take quick and effective action against infringers. I think one of the challenges posed will be the difficulty in getting in touch with infringers, making contact with them. And this kind of suggests wider strategies need to be considered, including, I guess, more use of kind of takedown procedures on websites, use of website blocking orders, and so on. I guess in making, in the practice I have in making approaches on behalf of brand owners recently, I've noticed that when you have identified the brand as being misused quite quickly, the misusers are often taking quite quick steps to rectify the position. Obviously that's good news, and they're quite happy to sign undertakings or withdraw applications, and I think the reason for that might be that this the environment is seeing a bit of a collapse in online sales, so misusers actually want to take quick action to avoid potentially expensive infringement proceedings being brought against them. Simon, do you have any sort of thoughts about dealing with the infringements?
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that in the wake of the credit crunch, our last big drama, a lot of people started defending their intellectual property more assiduously as a defence mechanism, and there was, as a result, more litigation. That may happen this time, I don't know. And you mentioned that the courts are still functioning. In that regard, some of my colleagues took part in one of the first fully remote hearings, and we've got quite an interesting podcast on their experiences. Things like, you know, using Zoom, making sure that you mute if you're conferring among yourselves, communicating between yourselves on your side in WhatsApp, and using Dropbox to share bundles. So up to a point, that element might be here to stay. So I don't think anyone should assume that just because we're all at home that we're all suddenly safe from the law.
Well, I mean, that's probably something that we should all keep in mind at all times anyway. Simon, what are the different commercialization options for a brand?
Yeah, well, imagine that, you know, I've talk about one of the scenarios that we've touched upon. I've come up with my new ventilator, and assuming that I've trademarked it and I've got patent protection for it, I might then sell it direct into the market myself, and that might be, in this case, that's going to be to the healthcare sector. If I'm a big company, I might be able to manufacture it in-house. If I don't have that manufacturing skill and capacity myself, then I might appoint a contract manufacturer to do that for me, and I'd give them the requirements to meet my specification, and I might also, if they developed improvements to the product or the manufacturing process, I might want access to those. Even if I make the product or have it made on my own behalf, there might be some markets I can't access because I'm not familiar with the language or the regulatory framework, or I don't have any contacts there. So that situation, for example, if MAU were my customer base in Finland, and I had no knowledge of or access to that market, I might appoint Michael as my distributor for Finland, and I would then sell him the products. He would then resell them into Finland to you as the customer, and I would impose the export requirements and the compliance with local Finnish law with him. However, I might impose some restrictions on him regarding what he says about the product and use of my brand. And also, if I've appointed other distributors in other Scandinavian or Nordic countries, then I might want to make it clear that Finland is the only territory that Michael can actively operate in. Alternatively, I might appoint Michael as my agent, and he would then go to Finland, get you as the customer, maybe negotiate the contract, but then I would sell the product to you, and you would have the contract with me, but then I would pay Michael the commission on the sales revenue, a bit like an agent for an actor or an author gets their money. If I have no expertise at all regarding product manufacture, then I might appoint Michael as my licensee. I give him all the intellectual property, and then he makes and sells the product in his own name. And it may well be that if I'm a company with no particular market profile, then Michael would want to put his own brand on it and then sell it, and then he would pay me a royalty for his own sales revenue. So there are various different models that are going to apply, and different industries use different ones.
All right. Thank you so much for explaining that. Well then, what about once things get back to normal, or whatever new normal is going to be? Do you think there'll be any lasting changes?
I think it's a bit of an exaggeration to say, and you're seeing it in the press now at the moment, and they're saying nothing will ever be the same again. And we hear that every time something happens, and it's a catchy headline, and it's a good way of getting people to read your stuff. As it is, a lot of stuff hasn't changed, and a lot of things that have changed will go back to normal. I don't think we're going to carry on all working from home, even if we could. And the fact that every time the sun comes out, everyone charges to the park or the beach and dodges the police suggests that we will be getting out and about again. I don't know what Finland's going to do, or the rest of the Nordics, with their summer solstice celebration this summer. I suspect that will have to happen virtually, and maybe the human sacrifice that carries out on at the end of the celebration to make sure that you have a good harvest will have to take place by Zoom this year.
Maybe next time you don't explain Finnish midsummer traditions on it.
But that's what we had to do on May Day in England. But yeah, I think though that there will still be an element of remote working, maybe obviously for a while in the office environment to maintain social distancing, people are going to have to maybe have half the staff in the office and then half off. You know, maybe in the long term, people might be renting smaller office premises and doing that sort of thing with an element of hot desking moving forward. And certainly, I think in terms of virtual meeting and cooperation and collaboration, what's happened to us has accelerated the process. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's right, Simon. I think that they're talking already about the shops opening in the middle of June. I saw a report that the 15th of June is the date we're all allowed back into the shops, but I think it's going to be a very different shopping environment, a very different experience for brand owners in that time. Obviously, we're all going to have to maintain our social distance, and I think it's going to become a challenge for smaller shops particularly, but even the larger businesses are going to have to think quite carefully about this. I read another report suggesting that if you were going to take an escalator from one floor to another, you had to leave a distance of 8 steps between people on the escalator. So the very number of people in the stores will be reduced, certainly for a period until things become a bit safer again. In terms of changes at the registries, we've seen changes with deadlines and so on that apply to trademark prosecution cases, opposition cases and so on being put on hold. That position is beginning to return to normal. The EU IPO is now working in a more normal fashion. The UK office is still reviewing the situation, and other registries are taking different views, but I think that gradually that will begin to change. The only other thing that is always in the back of my mind is Brexit. There are a few impacts for brands, and particularly for trademark owners there. Those who own European-wide trademarks, EU trademarks, as registrations will find that at the end of this year, those marks will migrate onto the UK register with an equivalent right on the UK register. Those owners which at the end of the year have a pending application, in other words, it's still going through the registry, will have a period of 9 months to file an application to have the rights migrated over from the EU register. So there are a few changes there to consider as well. But those are I think the main changes that occurred to me.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, yeah, definitely. It'll be really interesting to see sort of what the new normal will be after this. And I mean, obviously for us, a large part of what we do is events, so I can't wait for us to get back to live events. But at the same time, I think going virtual and going online has given us quite a lot of new kinds of content that we can do, and new kinds of opportunities and new ways we can bring value to our customers. So we've been really excited about that, and I don't think that we're gonna change or we're gonna stop doing that as soon as we get back to live events as well. Hopefully we'll be able to find a happy medium there. Thank you guys so much for all of your insights and input. Thank you everybody who is listening to us. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with myself at the Finnish-British Chamber of Commerce, or Michael or Simon at Marks Clerk. And hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.